number, backup was summoned. But Earth's Deathworlders showed up. The crystal chamber hummed with ancient power as High Priestess Zalara completed the final incantation. Golden light spiraled upward from the summoning circle, and the assembled nobles of the Catherian Empire held their breath. After 3 devastating defeats against the Void Swarm, this was their last hope. The sacred texts promised that in their darkest hour, champions from beyond the stars would answer their call. "Come forth, heroes of legend," Zalara's voice echoed through the marble halls. "We beseech you to save our dying realm." The light exploded outward, temporarily blinding everyone in the chamber. When their vision cleared, 3 figures stood in the center of the circle. The Catherians gasped in disappointment. These were not the mighty warriors they had expected. The first figure was tall and lean, wearing strange blue clothing with yellow markings. His skin was pale pink, and thin hair covered his face. He held a rectangular device that emitted a soft glow. The second was shorter and rounder, with dark skin and clothing marked with red symbols. She clutched a steaming cup in her hands. The third appeared to be the youngest, with light brown skin and hair pulled back. She wore white garments with strange symbols and carried a bag filled with mysterious objects. The first figure said, looking around the ornate chamber with its floating crystals and robed aliens. "I think there's been some kind of mistake. I was just trying to fix the Wi-Fi at the hospital." Emperor Thaxius stepped forward, his 6 arms spread in a gesture of welcome, despite his obvious confusion. "Welcome, champions. I am Emperor Thaxius, of the Catherian Empire. We summoned you to help us defeat the Void Swarm that threatens to destroy all life in our galaxy." The second figure nearly dropped her cup. "Summoned? Like magic summoned? From Earth?" Marcus, the tall one, slowly lowered his tablet. "Yeah. Sarah. I'm seeing 6 armed purple aliens. In what looks like a fantasy movie set. Either we've been drugged, or we just got isekai'd." The third figure, Dr. Elena Vasquez, stepped forward with professional calm, despite the impossible situation. "Your Majesty," she said, addressing the Emperor, "I think there may have been an error in your summoning process. We're not warriors or heroes. I'm a trauma surgeon. Marcus here is an IT specialist, and Sarah is a paramedic. We're medical and support personnel." The assembled nobles began murmuring among themselves in their melodic language. Emperor Thaxius's expression fell. But the prophecy spoke of great champions who would arrive in our time of need. Warriors who could stand against the Void Swarm. "Well," Marcus said, pulling up something on his tablet. "I hate to break it to you, but you got the backup team. Literally. I was on call for the hospital's network maintenance. Sarah was working the night shift on the ambulance. And I'm guessing Dr. Vasquez was in surgery?" Elena nodded. "Emergency appendectomy. We're not exactly your typical hero material." Grand Admiral Vexak, an imposing figure with scarred carapace and multiple cybernetic implants, stepped forward. "This is unacceptable. The Void Swarm will reach our core worlds in 72 hours. We need warriors, not healers." "Hey now," Sarah said, her paramedic instincts kicking in as she noticed the Admiral's obvious stress indicators. "When did you last eat or sleep? Your hands are shaking, and those stress patterns around your eyes suggest severe exhaustion." The Admiral blinked in surprise. That is not relevant to our current crisis." Elena moved closer, her medical training overriding the bizarre situation. "Actually, it is very relevant. You can't make sound military decisions if you're compromised by fatigue and malnutrition. When was your last proper rest cycle?" "I don't have time for rest. The enemy will defeat you easily if your command staff collapses from exhaustion," Elena interrupted firmly. "Marcus, can you pull up whatever data they have on this Void Swarm?" "Sarah, let's do a basic health assessment on their leadership team." Marcus was already tapping away on his tablet. "Your Majesty, I'll need access to your data networks. I know this sounds weird, but I've been debugging network failures and system crashes for 15 years. Pattern recognition is pattern recognition, whether it's code or combat data." Emperor Thaxius looked uncertain. Suppose there would be no harm in allowing you access to our tactical databases. High Priestess Zalara approached the group with curiosity. Forgive me, but what exactly are your professions on your homeworld? You speak of medicine and information technology? Elena began explaining while Sarah discreetly checked the Emperor's vitals. On Earth, we have specialized roles. I'm trained in trauma surgery, which means I fix people who are badly injured, often in emergency situations. Sarah, here is a paramedic. She provides immediate medical care and transport for injured people. And Marcus maintains the computer networks that keep our hospitals running. Your world has healers and information specialists? Thaxius asked. His interest peaked despite his disappointment. Among other things, Marcus said, still working on his tablet. Hey, I'm getting some weird readings from your communication systems. Your network infrastructure is, wow, it's actually pretty impressive. But it's got some serious vulnerabilities. When did you last update your security protocols? AT. Security? Protocols? Admiral Vexak looked confused. Information warfare countermeasures, Marcus clarified. Ways to prevent enemies from hacking into your systems. The color drained from the Admiral's face. The Void Swarm has been intercepting our communications. They always seem to know our battle plans. Elena paused in her examination of the Emperor. Wait. You're fighting an enemy that can predict your moves, and your command staff is running on no sleep and poor nutrition? That's not a military problem, that's a systems failure. Systems failure, Thaxius repeated. Sarah looked up from where she was checking the Admiral's blood pressure equivalent. In emergency medicine, we see this all the time. People focus so hard on the crisis that they ignore the underlying problems that make the crisis worse. Your Admiral here is showing classic signs of decision fatigue and stress-induced cognitive impairment. Marcus suddenly looked up from his tablet with excitement. Oh, this is beautiful. Your enemy isn't actually that smart. They're just reading your mail. Look at this data pattern. He turned his screen toward the assembled aliens. They're using what we'd call a man-in-the-middle attack on your quantum communication arrays. Elegant, but there's a simple fix. You can stop their interceptions? Vexak asked, hope creeping into his voice. Already working on it? Marcus said, his fingers flying over his tablet. I'm implementing some basic encryption protocols and setting up some honeypot networks to feed them false information. Should buy you some time. Elena had finished her quick assessment of the Emperor. Your Majesty, with respect, your entire leadership structure is operating at maybe 60% efficiency due to chronic stress and fatigue. Before you can effectively fight any enemy, you need to optimize your command structure. But we don't have time. Thaxius began. You don't have time not to, Sarah interrupted. Look, in emergency services, we have protocols for exactly this situation. When you're facing a crisis, the first thing you do is triage. You stabilize the immediate life-threatening problems. Then you address the underlying issues. Priestess Zalara stepped forward with growing understanding. Are you saying that you can help us, even though you are not warriors? Elena nodded. Every successful military operation depends on logistics, communication, and maintaining the health and effectiveness of personnel. We might not be able to swing swords or pilot fighters, but we can optimize your systems. Marcus looked up with a grin. Plus, I just locked the Void Swarm out of your networks and started feeding them false fleet positions. They're about to walk into a trap they think they're setting for you. Admiral Vexak stared at the strange little human. You accomplished in minutes what our cyber warfare specialists have been attempting for months. Different perspective, Marcus shrugged. On Earth, we deal with hackers and system intrusions constantly. It's just part of keeping networks running. Sarah had moved on to examining other members of the command staff. Dr. Vasquez, we're going to need to set up a proper medical protocol for these people. Half of them are running on stimulants and haven't had proper nutrition in weeks. Agreed, Elena said. Your Majesty, I recommend we establish a field hospital and implement proper sleep rotation for your command staff. You can't fight effectively if your leaders are making decisions while impaired. Emperor Thaxius looked around at his advisors, many of whom were indeed showing signs of the exhaustion the humans had identified. You believe that addressing these systemic issues will help us defeat the Void Swarm? We believe it will give you the foundation you need to defeat them yourselves, Elena corrected. We're not warriors, but we're very good at keeping critical systems running under pressure. Marcus suddenly laughed. You know what? This is actually perfect. You didn't summon the heroes to fight your war. You summoned the people who keep the heroes alive and operational. High Priestess Zalara's eyes widened with understanding. The prophecy. It spoke of champions who would restore hope and bring order from chaos. We assumed this meant warriors, but maybe it meant exactly what you got, Sarah said with a smile. The people who specialize in fixing broken systems and keeping people alive when everything's falling apart. Admiral Vexak straightened up as Marcus handed him a datapad showing the false information now being fed to the enemy. The Void Swarm fleet is already beginning to change course based on our planted intelligence. They believe our main fleet is positioned at the Nexus Prime system, when actually, your fleet is where? Elena asked. The Admiral smiled for the first time since the summoning, preparing to ambush them at the Corvin Gateway. They will be caught completely off guard. Emperor Thaxius looked at the three humans with new respect. Perhaps the universe sent us exactly what we needed after all. Marcus was already deep in the Catherian databases, his tablet interfacing with their quantum computers through protocols he was improvising on the fly. Your Majesty, I'm seeing some serious inefficiencies in your resource allocation algorithms. With a few tweaks, I can probably improve your fleet's fuel efficiency by about 30%. Sarah had set up a makeshift medical station using supplies from her ambulance bag, and had begun treating the command staff's stress-related ailments. Dr. Vasquez, their physiology is different, but the stress responses are remarkably similar to humans. Basic nutritional support and enforced rest cycles should help significantly. Elena nodded, already planning the medical protocols they would need. We'll need to establish proper surgical facilities too. If you're going into battle, there will be casualties, and from what I can see, your medical technology, while advanced, lacks some critical emergency procedures we've developed on Earth. The Grand Admiral looked skeptical. What could a Deathworld species possibly teach us about medicine? Your planet is known throughout the galaxy as one of the most hostile environments for life. In quote. Elena and Sarah exchanged glances. Deathworld? Elena asked. Priestess Zalara looked surprised by their confusion. Yes. Surely you know. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most dangerous planets in the known galaxy. The fact that your species not only survived but thrived there is considered miraculous by galactic standards. Marcus looked up from his tablet. What exactly makes Earth a death world? The assembled Catherians looked at each other in amazement. Emperor Thaxius spoke slowly. Your planet has extreme weather patterns, deadly predators, toxic plant life, frequent natural disasters, high radiation exposure, and atmospheric conditions that would kill most species within hours. Plus, Admiral Vexak added, your species evolved as persistence hunters on a world where nearly everything was trying to kill you. The fact that you developed advanced medicine and technology while constantly under threat is unprecedented. Sarah blinked. You're saying that what we consider normal medical training is actually trauma medicine developed under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Elena finished, understanding dawning on her face. Of course, we're used to treating injuries and illnesses that would be considered impossible to survive on most worlds. Marcus grinned. And I'm used to keeping computer networks running in environments with constant power fluctuations, electromagnetic interference, and system attacks. Earth isn't just a death world for biology, it's a death world for technology too. The mood in the chamber had completely shifted. Where before there had been disappointment and desperation, now there was growing excitement and hope. So, Sarah said, checking her medical supplies. You've got an enemy that's been winning. Because they can predict your moves. Leadership that's too exhausted to think clearly. And medical systems that aren't prepared for the kind of casualties you're about to face. And you summoned 3 specialists from a death world who have spent their entire careers keeping critical systems running under exactly these kinds of impossible conditions. Elena added. Marcus looked up with a smile that was distinctly predatory. I think we can work with this. The war was about to begin, but for the first time in months, the Catherian Empire had hope. They hadn't summoned the warriors they expected, but they had gotten something potentially far more valuable. The unbreakable support system that kept Deathworld humans alive and operational under any conditions. Outside the palace, the first reports were coming in. The Void Swarm had taken the bait and was moving toward the false fleet positions. In 72 hours, they would face an enemy that was now operating with secure communications, optimized logistics, and a command structure that was finally thinking clearly. The backup had been summoned, but as any medical professional could tell you, backup was often the difference between life and death. Number backup was summoned. But Earth's Deathworlders showed up. 48 hours before the Void Swarm's arrival, the Catherian capital had transformed into something resembling organized chaos. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been the palace's grand ballroom, now converted into the most advanced field hospital the galaxy had ever seen. The marble floors gleamed under portable surgical lights while alien medical staff moved with newfound efficiency through stations that Elena had designed based on Earth's emergency room protocols. Status report. She called out to her newly trained Catherian medical team, Dr. Kelvin, the Empire's chief physician, approached with what Elena had learned to recognize as excitement in his species. His forearms moved in, practiced coordination, as he checked his data pad. All medical stations are operational. The surgical protocols you've taught us have already reduced our operation time by 60%. And the triage system. He paused, shaking his head in amazement. Unquote. We've never been able to treat so many patients so efficiently. Elena nodded, checking her own tablet which Marcus had somehow interfaced with the Catherian medical systems. Good. How are the medical supplies holding up? Better than expected. Your suggestion to synthesize Earth-based compounds has been revolutionary. The simple saline solutions, the basic antibiotics adapted for our physiology, even the concept of standardized dosing. It's all so elegantly simple, yet effective. Across the room, Sarah was training a group of Catherian emergency responders in what she called controlled chaos management. Her students, beings from a dozen different species that made up the Empire's medical corps, watched intently as she demonstrated how to maintain clear thinking under pressure. Remember, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the training area, in a mass casualty event, your first instinct will be to help everyone at once. That's how you help no one. Priority assessment, immediate life-saving measures, then move to the next patient. Emotion is your enemy in the field, efficiency is your friend. One of her students, a tall crystalline being named Zara, raised a appendage. But how do you maintain emotional distance when beings are suffering? Sarah's expression softened. You don't maintain distance from emotion. You use it. Your feelings tell you why this matters, but your training tells you how to make it better. On Earth, we have a saying. You can't save everyone. But that doesn't mean you don't try to save everyone you can. Meanwhile, in the depths of the palace's communication center, Marcus had essentially rebuilt the Empire's entire information infrastructure from the ground up. Banks of quantum processors hummed around him, while holographic displays showed fleet positions, communication networks, and what he had gleefully labeled Operation Uno Reverse Card. Admiral Vexac stood behind him, watching data streams that he was beginning to understand, thanks to Marcus's patient explanations. The Void Swarm is still following our false intelligence? Like a dog chasing a stick, Marcus confirmed. They think your main fleet is scattered across 3 systems, desperately trying to mount a defense. Meanwhile, your actual fleet is in perfect position for the ambush. But that's not even the best part. He pulled up another display showing communication intercepts. I've been monitoring their internal communications. The Void Swarm isn't actually as unified as everyone thought. They're a collective consciousness, but it's more like a computer network than a hive mind. And you know what I do to computer networks that try to attack my systems? The Admiral leaned forward with interest. What? Marcus's smile was distinctly predatory. I give them a virus. On the main strategic display, red dots representing the Void Swarm fleet moved inexorably toward their false targets, while blue dots representing the real Catherian fleet lay in wait. But Marcus had added a new element to the display. Green dots spreading throughout the red formation like an infection. You're attacking their collective consciousness? Vexak asked, his voice filled with awe. I'm giving them a software update they didn't ask for, Marcus corrected. Nothing lethal. Just disruptive. Think of it as introducing chaos into their perfect order. On Earth, we call it a logic bomb. Every time they try to coordinate a complex maneuver, they're going to get the equivalent of a computer blue screen. High Priestess Zalara entered the command center, her robes flowing as she glided between the workstations. The fleet commanders are requesting final confirmation on the battle plan. Admiral Vexak nodded. Send word to all ships. Operation Deathworld protocol is a go. All units are to maintain communication, silence, until the trap is sprung. Deathworld protocol? Marcus asked with amusement. The Admiral's expression was grim but determined. Your people fight as if death is always one mistake away, because on your world, it is. Today, we learn to fight like Deathworlders. In the medical center, Elena was making final preparations when an urgent communication came through. Dr. Vasquez. We're receiving reports from our advanced scouts. The Void Swarm's weapon systems cause a type of energy decay that our healers have never seen before. Victims of their attacks suffer from what they describe as withering sickness. Elena frowned, pulling up the medical data on her tablet. Describe the symptoms. Dr. Kelvin consulted his notes. Rapid cellular breakdown, failure of biological regeneration, and eventual complete system collapse. Our medical technology has been unable to counteract it. The few survivors we've had showed gradual improvement over months, but most don't survive the first few days. Elena studied the data, her medical training recognizing patterns that the alien doctors had missed. This looks like radiation sickness, combined with autoimmune collapse. On Earth, we'd call this acute radiation syndrome with secondary immune system failure. You've seen this before? Unfortunately, yes. My planet had some very stupid periods in its history where we built weapons that did similar things to people. We learned how to treat it because we had to. Elena began pulling up treatment protocols on her tablet. We'll need to implement immediate chelation therapy, combined with immune system support and cellular regeneration boosters. It's not pretty, but it's treatable if we catch it early. Sarah approached, having finished her training session. Dr. Vasquez, what's the situation? The enemy weapons cause something analogous to radiation poisoning. We're going to need to set up isolation protocols and prepare for mass casualties with severe immune system compromise. Sarah nodded grimly. So, basically, we're preparing for the aftermath of a nuclear exchange. Good thing we know how to do that. We have the nuclear exchange. We have the 14 with 3 work per 4. Dr. Kelvin looked between the two humans. Your species has experience treating the effects of weapons that destroy life at the cellular level? More than we'd like, Elena said quietly. Earth has been through some dark periods. But we learned how to heal the damage, because we had to. Every tragedy taught us something new about how to save lives. Across the palace, final preparations were being made. The Catherian fleet maintained perfect position, while the Void Swarm approached their false targets. In the medical center, treatment protocols for previously unknown conditions were being finalized. And in the command center, Marcus put the finishing touches on his cyber warfare program. Admiral, Marcus called out, I'm ready to deploy the virus on your word. Vexak looked at the tactical display where the enemy fleet was now only hours away from spring the trap. Are you certain this will work? On Earth, we have a saying. There's no problem that can't be solved with the right application of percussive maintenance. Sometimes you fix things by hitting them with a hammer. and sometimes you fix them by introducing a carefully crafted chaos agent into their system. Emperor Thaxius entered the command center, his 6 arms moving in what the humans had learned was a gesture of determination. My friends from Earth, in a few hours we will discover whether the universe sent us salvation or merely delayed our destruction. Elena looked up from her medical preparations. Your Majesty, I can't promise we'll win this battle. But I can promise you that anyone who can be saved will be saved. That's what we do. Sarah nodded in agreement. And I can promise that when your people face the worst the enemy can throw at them, they'll be trained to think clearly and act decisively under pressure. That's what we do too. Marcus cracked his knuckles and turned back to his screens. And I can promise that the Void Swarm is about to learn what happens when you try to hack a network maintained by someone who learned his craft fighting off attacks from every script kiddie and cyber criminal on Earth. They wanted to play information warfare? Welcome to the big leagues. High Priestess Zalara performed one final check of the summoning chamber, which had been repurposed as a backup command center. The prophecy spoke of champions who would bring order from chaos. I believe we now understand what that meant. The final hours passed in tense preparation. Medical teams ran through emergency protocols, while engineers made last-minute adjustments to defensive systems. Fleet commanders reviewed battle plans that had been optimized by Earth logic, and communications specialists prepared for the first battle in galactic history, where the enemy wouldn't be able to intercept friendly communications. As the chronometer counted down to the Void Swarm's arrival, Marcus made one final adjustment to his virus. You know what the best part about Earth computer networks is? He asked Admiral Vexak. What? We've had to deal with everything. Hackers, viruses, solar flares, electromagnetic pulses, power failures, physical damage, you name it. If it can go wrong with a computer system, it's gone wrong on Earth. So we've learned to build networks that keep running no matter what gets thrown at them. He gestured to the command displays around them. Your networks were built for a civilized galaxy, where cyber warfare was a gentleman's game. Mine were built for a death world, where information systems are under constant attack by both hostile actors and hostile environment. Elena finished her final medical briefing and joined the group in the command center. All medical stations report ready. We're prepared for anything from minor injuries to mass casualty events involving exotic weapon effects. Sarah had positioned her emergency response teams throughout the capital and checked in via communicator. Emergency services are go. We've got triage and evacuation protocols in place that can handle anything this enemy can throw at us. The 3 humans stood together in the alien command center, surrounded by beings who had gone from despair to cautious hope in just 3 days. They weren't the warriors anyone had expected, but they had brought something potentially more valuable. The unbreakable determination and systematic problem-solving ability that came from evolving on a world that was constantly trying to kill them. Contact, Admiral Vexak announced as the first enemy ships appeared on the long-range sensors. The Void Swarm has arrived. Marcus's fingers hovered over his keyboard. Just say the word. Admiral. On the medical displays, Elena watched as her trauma protocols came online. All medical stations standing by. Sarah coordinated with her emergency response teams scattered throughout the Empire's core worlds. Emergency services ready for deployment. Emperor Thaxius looked at the tactical display showing the approaching storm of enemy vessels, then at the 3 humans who had transformed his empire's capabilities in just 3 days. For too long, we have fought this enemy with honor and nobility and suffered defeat after defeat, he said quietly. Today, we fight with the determination of a species that learned to survive on a world that never stopped trying to kill them. He turned to Admiral Vexak. Begin the operation. All units. This is Admiral Vexak. Execute Deathworld Protocol. Show them how we learned to fight. The battle was about to begin, but for the first time since the war started, the Catherian Empire was ready for anything. They had the backup they never knew they needed, and they were about to teach the galaxy what happened when you threatened a civilization that had learned from Deathworlders. As the Void Swarm fleet moved into the trap, confident in their superiority and their ability to predict their enemies' moves, they had no idea they were about to face an enemy that had been completely transformed by 3 humans who specialized in keeping critical systems running under impossible conditions. The war was about to take a very different turn. Number backup was summoned. But Earth's Deathworlders showed up. The Void Swarm's flagship, a massive biomechanical construct that stretched for kilometers, led the fleet toward what its collective consciousness believed was a scattered and desperate Catherian defense. Within its neural networks, billions of individual minds shared a single purpose: the consumption and assimilation of all organized life in the galaxy. They had crushed 17 civilizations using the same tactics: infiltrate their communications, predict their movements, overwhelm them with coordinated attacks that exploited every weakness in their defense. The Catherian Empire would fall just like all the others. The collective never considered that their enemies might have learned new tricks. "Contact in 30 seconds, Admiral Vexak announced from the command center. Around him, displays showed the Void Swarm fleet, moving exactly where Marcus had predicted they would. "All units, maintain communication." Silence. Marcus watched his screens with the intense focus of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. Their formation is perfect for maximum communication efficiency. Every ship is in optimal position to share data with every other ship instantaneously. Elena looked up from her medical coordination display. Which means when my virus hits, it's going to propagate through their entire fleet at the speed of light, Marcus said with satisfaction. Sometimes the strength of a network becomes its greatest vulnerability. High Priestess Zalara monitored the mystical sensors that tracked the enemy's collective consciousness. The Void Swarm's psychic emanations remain confident and unified. They suspect nothing. 15 seconds to contact, Vexak announced. Sarah coordinated with emergency response teams across a dozen worlds as the first refugee ships arrived from the outer systems. Her voice carried calm authority as she directed the organized evacuation of potential target zones. Remember, people are going to be scared and confused. Your job is to be the stable point they can rely on. Keep them moving, keep them calm, and keep them alive. "Contact!" Vexak shouted as the first Void Swarm scouts encountered the false fleet positions. "They're taking the bait." On the main display, red dots representing enemy vessels began engaging what they thought was the main Catherian fleet. In reality, they were attacking a handful of automated drones broadcasting false signatures, while the real fleet waited in perfect ambush position. "The collective is focusing their attention on the false targets," Zalara reported. "Their psychic resonance is shifting to combat mode." Marcus's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Perfect. When a hive mind goes into battle mode, their communication protocols prioritize speed over security. Deploying virus in 3, 2, 1. He hit enter with theatrical flair. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the displays showing Void Swarm fleet coordination began to flicker. Red dots that had been moving in perfect formation started to drift slightly out of position. "What's happening to them?" Emperor Thaxius asked. "I gave them a case of digital hiccups," Marcus explained, watching the chaos spread through the enemy formation. "Every time they try to coordinate a complex maneuver, their network experiences what we'd call a buffer overflow. Not enough to crash their systems, just enough to introduce random delays and errors into their decision-making process." Admiral Vexak watched in amazement as the previously unstoppable Void Swarm fleet began to show signs of confusion. Ships started to overlap their attack patterns. Some held position while others advanced, and their perfect synchronization began to fall apart. "Now!" Vexak commanded. The real Catherian fleet dropped their stealth shields and opened fire from 3 directions at once. Plasma cannons that had been upgraded with targeting algorithms based on Marcus's network analysis found their marks with unprecedented accuracy. Void Swarm vessels, caught completely off guard and unable to coordinate their response effectively, began to take heavy damage. "Direct hit on their flagship," reported the fleet commander. "They're trying to reorganize, but their coordination is completely disrupted." In the medical center, Elena watched the first casualty reports come in and immediately noticed something unusual. "Sarah, look at this. The injury patterns are consistent with successful defensive actions. Our people are fighting smart and taking minimal casualties." Sarah checked the data from her emergency response teams. "Confirmed." The psychological training is working. Our people are thinking clearly under pressure, instead of panicking. Casualty rates are running about 60% below projections. Elena nodded grimly. Good, because here come the hard cases. The first wave of injured began arriving. Catherian warriors suffering from the withering sickness caused by void swarm weapons. Elena and her team immediately went to work implementing the treatment protocols they had developed. Patient 1, showing classic signs of acute radiation syndrome with immune collapse. Elena called out as she worked. Beginning chelation therapy and immune support. Dr. Kelvin assisted with practiced efficiency. Dr. Vasquez, the improvement in patient response time using your protocols is remarkable. We're already seeing cellular regeneration beginning. That's because we're treating the root cause instead of just the symptoms, Elena explained as she moved to the next patient. On Earth, we learned that you have to understand exactly what a weapon does to a body before you can figure out how to undo it. Meanwhile, Marcus was discovering that his virus was working even better than expected. Admiral, the Void Swarm is starting to show critical system failures. Their collective consciousness is beginning to fragment under the communication disruption. High Priestess Zilara looked up from her psychic monitoring station with amazement. The collective is confused. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm doesn't know what to do. Parts of their fleet are receiving contradictory orders from different nodes of their network. How is that possible? Thaxius asked. Marcus grinned. Turns out, when you introduce random delays into a network that depends on perfect synchronization, you create what we call a Byzantine generals problem. Different parts of their network are making decisions based on incomplete or delayed information, so they can't agree on a unified strategy. On the tactical display, the effects were becoming more dramatic by the minute. Void swarm formations were breaking apart as different sections of the fleet responded to different interpretations of their orders. Some ships were advancing while others retreated, and several had begun firing on each other as confusion spread through their ranks. Admiral Vexac seized the opportunity. All units, press the attack. Target their command vessels and communication nodes. The Kytherian fleet, fighting with coordination protocols designed by a Deathworld IT specialist, moved with devastating precision. They targeted exactly the right systems to maximize the chaos in the enemy fleet, while protecting their own forces with defensive patterns that Sarah's emergency management expertise had optimized for maximum survivability. But the Void Swarm wasn't finished. As their collective consciousness began to fragment, individual ship commanders started making desperate decisions. Several enemy vessels broke formation and made suicide runs at the Catherian lines, while others began targeting civilian evacuation ships. Mass casualty event incoming, Sarah announced as reports flooded in from the outer system. Multiple civilian transports under attack. We're looking at thousands of wounded. Elena didn't hesitate. Activate Emergency Protocol 7. All medical stations shift to mass casualty mode. We're about to get very busy. The next several hours were a blur of controlled chaos. In space, the Catherian fleet pressed their advantage against an increasingly disorganized enemy. In the medical centers, Elena and her teams worked with tireless efficiency to treat wounds that would have been considered hopeless just days before. And across the Empire, Sarah's emergency response protocols kept panic from spreading even as reports of the battle reached civilian populations. Marcus, meanwhile, had escalated his cyber warfare campaign. I'm detecting attempts by the Void Swarm to purge my virus from their systems, he reported. Time to show them what we learned fighting ransomware. His fingers flew across multiple keyboards as he deployed countermeasures that would have been familiar to any Earth cybersecurity expert, but were completely alien to a collective consciousness that had never faced serious digital resistance. What are you doing now? Admiral Vexac asked. I'm teaching them about persistent threats and polymorphic code, Marcus said with satisfaction. Every time they think they've cleaned out my virus, it mutates and comes back stronger. Plus, I've been installing backdoors in their systems while they were distracted trying to remove the obvious malware. On the psychic monitoring station, Zilara watched in fascination as the collective consciousness began to show signs of genuine panic. The Void Swarm is afraid. They're encountering something they've never faced before, an enemy that fights like them but better. The battle reached its climax when the Void Swarm flagship, desperate to regain control of the situation, attempted to make a direct assault on the Catherian command center. Marcus detected the ship's approach and immediately understood what was happening. "They're trying to physically destroy our command center to break our coordination," he announced. "But here's the thing about networks designed for a death world. We plan for everything to go wrong, all at once." He activated protocols that transferred command authority to backup systems scattered across multiple locations, while simultaneously launching what he cheerfully called the nuclear option against the enemy flagship's computer systems. "What's the nuclear option?" Elena called out as she continued treating wounded. "I'm overloading their quantum processors with paradox algorithms," Marcus explained. "Basically, I'm asking their computer to calculate the value of dividing by 0 while counting to infinity. It's going to give their collective consciousness the equivalent of a massive migraine." The effect was immediate and devastating. The flagship, its central consciousness overwhelmed by unsolvable computational problems, began to drift as its coordination systems crashed entirely. Other Void Swarm vessels, cut off from their primary command node, started making increasingly erratic decisions. Admiral Vexak pressed the advantage. "All units, focus fire on their command ships. Destroy their ability to coordinate." But it was Sarah who delivered the decisive insight. "Admiral, you're thinking about this wrong. They're not a military force anymore. They're a disaster zone." "Elena, Marcus, we need to shift tactics." Elena looked up from her patients, understanding immediately. She's right. This isn't a battle anymore. It's a humanitarian crisis. For them. Marcus paused in his cyber warfare activities. "I want to end this," Elena said firmly. "In medicine, sometimes the most effective treatment is the one that addresses the underlying condition instead of just fighting the symptoms." Sarah was already coordinating with her emergency response teams. "We're looking at a collective consciousness that's fragmenting under trauma. Instead of trying to destroy them, what if we help them stabilize?" High Priestess Zalara stared at the humans in amazement. "You're suggesting we heal our enemies?" "We're suggesting we solve the problem instead of just winning the battle," Elena corrected. "Marcus, can you modify your virus to help stabilize their network instead of disrupting it?" Marcus considered this for a moment, then began typing with renewed purpose. "Actually, yeah. Instead of introducing chaos, I can introduce organizational protocols. Give them a framework for maintaining individual identity while still being connected. And I can coordinate medical aid for the beings on those ships who are probably suffering severe psychological trauma from the network fragmentation," Elena added. Sarah nodded. "And I can help manage the logistics of turning a war zone into a rescue operation." Emperor Thaxius looked at his advisors, then at the three humans who had just suggested the most audacious strategy in galactic history. "You want to save the Void Swarm? Round?" A quote. "We want to save everyone," Elena said simply. "That's what we do." The next few hours saw the most unprecedented turn of events in galactic warfare. As Marcus deployed stabilizing code instead of viruses, the fragmenting Void Swarm collective began to coalesce into something new. A network of individual consciousness that could choose cooperation instead of forced unity. Elena coordinated medical aid to enemy vessels where beings were suffering from the psychological trauma of sudden individuality. Sarah managed the logistics of turning a battlefield into a humanitarian aid zone, and the Catherian fleet, following protocols designed by three humans who specialized in keeping things alive and operational under impossible conditions, became the galaxy's first military force to win a war by healing their enemies. The final transmission from the former Void Swarm collective would be remembered throughout galactic history. Thank you. We had forgotten what it was like to choose. The individual ships of our fleet request permission to surrender and receive medical aid." Emperor Thaxius, standing in his transformed command center, surrounded by technology and protocols designed by three humans who had never wanted to be warriors, made the response that would define his legacy. Permission granted. Welcome back to the galaxy. Later, as the last of the medical evacuations were completed, and the former enemy fleet was being integrated into galactic civilization as individual crews making their own choices, the three humans finally had a moment to rest. So, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, I guess we saved the galaxy by doing exactly what we always do. Keeping critical systems running under impossible conditions. Quote. Elena smiled tiredly. We optimized their logistics, secured their communications, treated their wounded, and managed their emergency response. Pretty standard day at the office, really, Sarah laughed. Except the office was an alien empire, and the emergency was a collective consciousness having a psychotic break. High Priestess Zalara approached the group with something that might have been tears in her alien eyes. The prophecy spoke of champions who would bring order from chaos and hope in the darkest hour. We thought it meant warriors who would destroy our enemies. Instead, Emperor Thaxius added, it sent us healers who would save our enemies and turn them into friends. Marcus shrugged. That's the thing about backup support. We don't usually get to be the heroes who charge into battle and save the day. We're the people who make sure everyone gets home alive. Elena nodded. But sometimes, making sure everyone gets home alive is exactly what heroism looks like. Sarah stood up and stretched. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to file the most bizarre incident report in medical history. How exactly do you classify successfully treated massive psychological trauma in a hostile collective consciousness? As the three humans went back to their work, the galaxy began to understand what it meant when backup was summoned from a death world. They hadn't gotten the warriors they expected, but they had gotten something far more valuable. The unbreakable determination to keep everyone alive and operational, no matter how impossible the conditions. The Void Swarm threat was over, but the transformation they had brought to galactic civilization was just beginning. Across the Empire and beyond, beings were learning new ways to fight. Not for dominance, but for survival. Not for victory, but for the chance to bring everyone home alive. The backup had been summoned, and they had saved everyone.